There is a name in Chinese history that made the bravest generals in the empire turn their horses and run. A man who didn't just win battles, he ended them. They called him the God of War. Among men, Lu Bu. Among horses, red hair. For 1,800 years, that has been the gold standard for power. But here's the thing about the God of War. He was also the king of backstabbers. Today, we aren't just talking about a warrior. We're talking about a man who nearly ended Cao Cao's career with a single helmet tap. A man who stopped a 30,000-man war with one impossible arrow. But how does the strongest man in the world end up tied to a chair, begging for his life in front of the very people he once terrified? To understand the fall of Lu Bu, we have to look at the price he paid for his power. And that price? It was his soul. In the world of the three kingdoms, your word was your life. Honor was the currency of the elite. But Lu Bu? Lu Bu only traded in cold, hard power. It started with a horse, a stallion so fast it was said to run 1,000 miles a day. The red hare. To get it, Lu Bu didn't just defect. He murdered his own foster father, Ding Yuan, and brought his head to the tyrant Dong Zhuo as a gift. This gave Lu Bu his second father and his second big paycheck. Dong Zhuo was the most hated man in China, but with Lu Bu as his bodyguard, he was untouchable. Lu Bu was the ultimate insurance policy. If you tried to kill the tyrant, you had to go through the God of War first. But loyalty isn't Lu Bu's strong suit. Enter Daio-chan, a woman sent to tear them apart, a classic honey trap. She played on Lu Bu's ego and Dong Zhuo's lust until the God of War did it again. He drove his halberd through the heart of his second father in the middle of the imperial court. By the time the dust settled, Lu Bu was the strongest man in the country and the most isolated. Zhang Fei famously screamed it to his face, "You bastard with 3 fathers." It wasn't just an insult, it was a brand. Lu Bu had the horse, he had the girl, and he had the halberd. But he had just signed his own death warrant. Because in this world, if you can't be trusted, you can't be allowed to live. And his first target for a new home? A rising star named Cao Cao. And it was about to become the most terrifying night of Cao Cao's life. Most people think Cao Cao was the undisputed predator of this era, but in 194 AD, Cao Cao was the prey. While he was away on a revenge mission, Lu Bu struck his home base like a lightning bolt. This wasn't just a raid, it was a hostile takeover. The Battle of Puyang. It was a nightmare of fire and steel. Lu Bu's cavalry moved like ghosts in the smoke, tearing Cao Cao's elite units to pieces. For the first time, the great hero Cao Cao felt the cold breath of death on his neck. This is the moment that became a legend. As the city burned, Cao Cao was separated from his guard. He was disguised as a common grunt covered in soot. Lu Bu, the God of War himself, rode right up to him. Lu Bu didn't recognize him. He tapped Cao Cao's helmet with his blade and asked, "Hey, you, where's Cao Cao?" Without missing a beat, Cao Cao pointed to a rider in the distance and said, "He's that guy on the dun horse." Lu Bu didn't even look twice. He spurred red hair and vanished into the smoke. Cao Cao escaped with his life, but he left his dignity in the ashes of Puyang. This wasn't just a battle Lu Bu won, it was a trauma he inflicted. From that second on, Cao Cao realized that Lu Bu wasn't just a rival. He was a monster that had to be put down, not with honor, but with total, drowning force. But before the final showdown, Lu Bu had one more trick to show the world, a feat of skill that proved he wasn't just a brute, he was a god. By 1906 AD, Lu Bu had borrowed Shu province from Liu Bei, but now he was caught in a political vice. A massive army was marching to crush Liu Bei. If Liu Bei falls, Lu Bu is next. But Liu Bu is tired of bleeding. He decides to settle a war with a party. He invites both sides to a banquet. The tension is thick enough to cut with a sword. Then, Lu Bu stands up and makes a bet that sounds like a joke. He has his men march a tiny halberd 150 paces away, over 200 yards, and plant it in the dirt at the gate. If my arrow hits that tiny side blade, you both pack up and go home. If I miss, you can slaughter each other, and I won't stop you. The generals laugh. From that distance, you can barely see the halberd, let alone the blade. This is the ultimate flex. 30,000 soldiers hold their breath. Lu Bu lets go. Direct hit. The generals are speechless. The war is over before it started. In that single moment, Lu Bu wasn't just a warrior. He was a god. But here's the problem with being a god. You start to think you're untouchable. And back in the capital, Cao Cao was already building a cage that even a god couldn't escape. Cao Cao didn't forget the flames of Puyang. He didn't forget the humiliation. He arrived at Lu Bu's stronghold, Xiapi, with a massive army. But he didn't charge the gates. He knew Lu Bu in a fair fight was suicide. So he fought dirty. Cao Cao diverted the local rivers, literally drowning the city. For months, Lu Bu was trapped. The god of war was reduced to a caged animal, watching the water rise and his supplies rot. Inside the walls, the atmosphere turned toxic. Lu Bu became paranoid. He banned alcohol, then beat his own officers when they tried to celebrate a small victory. He was losing the only thing that could save him, the loyalty of his men. While the god of war slept, his own generals reached their breaking point. They didn't just defect, they tied him up in his own bed and stole his legendary halberd. When Lu Bu woke up, the water was at his door, his weapon was gone, and his enemies were waiting. Lu Bu was the ultimate weapon. Even bound in ropes, he was terrifying. He looked Cao Cao in the eye and offered him the world. And for a second, Cao Cao considered it. He looked at the god of war and saw the perfect tool for his empire. But then, Cao Cao turned to Liu Bei and asked for his opinion. Liu Bei didn't talk about Lu Bu's strength. He just said, "Do you remember what happened to Ding Yuan and Dong Chuo?" That was it. The Three Fathers brand had finally become a noose. Lu Bu was strangled at the White Gate Tower, not because he was weak, but because he was too strong to be trusted. Lu Bu was the greatest warrior of his age, but he died with no one to mourn him. He proved that in the Three Kingdoms, muscle can win you a battle, but only loyalty can win you a war. Was Lu Bu a victim of his own strength, or just a man with no soul? Drop a comment below. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. It really helps the channel grow. Thanks.